Hey y'all, James again. I'm here today for my Week 8 persuasive speech. I'm wearing this shirt today not as necessarily as a football fan, but more of being a fan of being a patriot. I love this country. I love everything it has to do with it. So with that, let's go and get started with this, and I hope you all will see my way. Did you know that in today's country, Congress, less than 20% of all elected officials have military experience under their belt? Almost all of our founding forefathers had military service to build upon. I'm not saying that our country leaders need to be some kind of warmonger or something like that, but how can the people of today lead the world's mightiest military into war if they've never experienced it themselves? My name is Amos Salisbury, and today I plan on showing you how imperative it is that the people who we elected to lead our great nation have some kind of military background. I will cite several news sources and give a brief list of previous presidents that have military service on their resume, as well as maybe a couple that do not. I'll begin with where we are today and work backwards to the Revolutionary War and the founding of our country. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to focus primarily on the presidency. According to a USA Today news story dated 20 November 2012, out of 535 combined members, only 19% have served in the military. This is, of course, the Gulf War era. Of that number, 25 are senators, 90 of those are representatives in the House of Representatives, and even President Obama does not have military service. Go back just a little bit, and we'll go to post-Vietnam, around 1977. At that time, 80%, that's 80% of Congress had military experience. Now that includes President Ford, Nixon, Carter. They all served in some way, shape, or fashion. Now we're going to walk back a little bit further through time and look at World War II. During World War II itself, after Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president, now he had no military service. This was not due to his not trying to. His ill health prevented him from doing that. But he was still one of our greatest presidents. World War II itself was a breeding ground for a whole slew of future presidents and presidential hopefuls even. Now, according to the Department of Veterans Affairs website, this pool of veterans included President Truman, he served, President Eisenhower. Hell, he was the supreme Allied commander in World War II in Europe. He led the country, the battle against Germany and Axis of Allies, Axis powers. From World War II, we also got President Reagan, the first Bush, his son, the second George Bush, and again Carter, to name a few of the future presidents. They all served. They all had the military experience, which allowed them to lead the country and be great in their own right. Now we're going back even a little bit further and see what was happening during the Great Depression. And then even further than that, we'll go back into World War I. We'll walk back through all this. According to a Bloomberg.com news story, World War II ended the Great Depression. And this was mostly due to, well, war necessitates industrial revolution. This revolution in particular was the aerospace industry, the birth of the aerospace industry itself. They also led into weapons manufacturing, which created a whole bunch of jobs, new jobs. Now to World War I, go from Taft to FDR. None of the presidents had a military experience. Now, this will lead into a question. Did this lack of military experience bring us into these wars in the Great Depression? That is a question for a future debate. It's not something we can really go into now due to time constraints. But the second question that comes into that is, if these presidents had military experience, would they have gone into this war, into a war of this magnitude so freely? I use the term freely out of context a little bit there, but you get my point. Now, we're going to ride this train back in time and see that pre-World War I, But the country's focus wasn't on maintaining or building an army, but on rebuilding from the Civil War. In the Civil War, well, from World War I back into the Civil War, WhiteHouse.gov talks about Theodore Roosevelt. Actually, they list all the presidents. I focus here on Teddy Roosevelt because after doing a bunch of this research for this paper, I determined that Teddy Roosevelt was by far my favorite president. He was the man's man. He was the man's president. He was the youngest president at age 43. That's pretty young. He's only a couple years older than me. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War. That's where he got his claim to fame. He was the leader of the Rough Riders. He was a war hero. He led the charge up San Juan Hill, which helped him win the war down there. One of his big quotes, of course, back then was, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." That means he might talk a bunch of smack, but he will back it up. And as president, he backed it up with the military. We're a big stick. I would encourage you to read up on him. His life makes some really good stories, even if some of them may be a little far-fetched. From what I read, most of them were true. He was quite the action figure. Now go back previous to him, get Ulysses S. Grant. He was a general of the Union Army during the Civil War. His leadership was pivotal to the Union defeating the Confederacy and ending the Civil War. He brought this leadership of that as a general into the presidency and led forward from there. We'll take a step back from there, back to Abe Lincoln. Honest Abe. Even he had military experience. He was a captain during the Black Hawk War. Now we're going to gallop this horse back to the Revolutionary War and the beginning of our country. George Washington. According to the MountVernon.org, he was a general in the Continental Army. We all know this. Even though he lost more battles than he won, his leadership was pivotal to winning the Revolutionary War. He brought the same leadership to the presidency and established so many precedents for presidents and for our country in our way ahead. He steered this fledgling country into the direction we are today. As you can see, not every president had military experience under their belts. The great ones, Eisenhower, Teddy Roosevelt, Grant, Washington, all had significant military service that enabled them to lead our country through tumultuous times, each in their own right. From Carter, Ford, and Nixon rebuilding confidence after Vietnam to FDR bringing us out of the Depression. The pool of presidents that came after World War II was nothing short of impressive, to say the least. Truman, Reagan, G.W. Bush, Eisenhower. Hell, like I said, he was the Supreme Allied Commander in World War II in Europe. Then we got into debate on whether the lack of military service led us into World War I and World War II. Again, that's a topic for another conversation. The Civil War brought us more than a couple presidents. Teddy Roosevelt, and my favorite, Ulysses S. Grant, and of course, Honest Abe Lincoln. Then we went back to the beginning and looked at George Washington and the birth of our country. After looking at all these great and formidable presidents of our past with their decorated military history, I ask you again, how can the elected officials of today lead our great nation if they don't have any military experience? I ask you to ponder this and take it to action at your next election. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.